The reality is Mother Nature is always trying to get in your home, and at some point, for many of us, she wins. Water makes its way in, and you have to deal with flooding, partial or full. If you're in a ground unit here in the city, it could be your entire home. If you have a single-family home, it might just be your basement. No matter what, the pain can be moderate to extreme, and it can cost tens of thousands of dollars to go through the process of not only repairing everything, but dealing with remediation and checking for mold, and it can be a nightmare. So today we're going to talk through really what comes with a flooded basement or a flooded home. What can you expect going through the process of trying to remediate and get back to a somewhat normal state? And what are some ways that you can prevent this from happening in the future, both literally in the sense of waterproofing your home and in the sense of maybe understanding your insurance a little bit better. Matt Thomas. I'm a real estate agent here in Chicago, Illinois. I help buyers, sellers, and investors every single day. And today I want to talk through some recent pain I've had in my home ownership journey. Now, I'm not a plumber. I'm not an insurance expert. I just happen to have experience in this field through things I've seen in my own home and in other homes. And I'm sharing what I know, or at least what I've been able to find out so far. I've been a condo owner here in Chicago since 2020. I've been a homeowner since 2022. And my home is an 1892 built single-family home in Irving Park. That brings a lot of uniqueness and unique challenges with it. For many people in Chicago, the beginning of July was a wet mess.
This record rainfall turning roads into rivers.
Heavy downpours lingering over the city and suburbs for hours Sunday, causing major flooding.
At one point this morning, no less than 7 vehicles and their passengers were trapped.
And I mean that literally. We had more rain than we've had in a long time. For some neighborhoods, the flooding was overwhelming. I believe on July 2nd was the day we had 9 inches of rain on that day alone. And quite frankly, the sewer systems, the drainage systems, everything that's at play here in a major city to keep us from flooding failed. We can't handle 9 inches in a single day, and many foundations, basements, sewers backlogged. I mean, there just was water everywhere. And now I will start by saying I'm very fortunate. I did not have my entire basement flood. I do have a finished basement, or a partially finished basement, I should say. There's an entire in-law suite down there, and we use it for Airbnb. Had that flooded, I would have been looking at tens of thousands of dollars to replace everything. So I got very fortunate that I didn't have the situation that many Chicagoans found themselves in, which is 6 to 9 inches of water rushing up through their sewer line and flooding out their basement, or in some cases, if you're in a ground unit, your actual house. So let's go back to the day. July 2nd, 9 inches of rain. It was crazy. Water was pooling in my yard. I had inches of water sitting. There was no drainage prevention available. And sure enough, before I realized it, water was actually coming into my basement. Now, to some extent, I understood this. I actually have a cracked slab under one of my doors. It's something that's been on my list to get repaired. I'm sure all homeowners can relate to that list that just keeps growing and you never get through it. But anyway, it's something that I need to get fixed. And in this case, because the water backed up so much outside and actually backed up to a point where it came through this crack and into my basement, which sucks. So I had a direct leak of groundwater or pooling water from outside that came through this crack into the basement. But that wasn't the only source of water. In my back room of my basement, there also was water penetration. This seemed to be, well, frankly, related to something I couldn't see. It was happening behind drywall. It has happened a couple times since. It happened a few times before in a very light state with heavy rain. But this case, 9 inches, I mean, I really learned that there was a water penetration issue there. So I now have a concrete slab that's leaking, and I have a partial foundation, at least seepage. I don't know that there's anything wrong with the foundation. I do know that water is making it in, which is not a great thing. On top of it all, I learned that my gutter's not working. One of my gutters, after a little bit of drone footage, shows that it's not only full of a literal growing plant, it's bent, it's not collecting water, it's definitely not doing what it's supposed to. So all this together, when we get a massive rainfall, me as a homeowner, I wasn't ready for it. I had some mistakes in place. My gutter failed. This crack that should have been dealt with wasn't. I had some water get in, and I'm now dealing with the ramifications of that. So maybe just in and of itself, this video is a learning lesson that if you put off maintenance, deferred maintenance leads to more problems, and more problems cost more money. So shame on me, but we're recovering from here, and here's exactly what to do now. So in this case, most of the damage that I have in my home is in an entryway on what is actually the exterior of the home. So going back, this is an 1890s home. The original foundation of the actual home is in the basement, and you can see it in this video. The built-out extension with all this tile, we use it as a mudroom. This was built much later. This is a rolled concrete foundation. It's probably built within the last 50 years. I don't exactly know, but that would be my guess. So it's just a different part of the home, and that is why when we're looking at the leak, I actually don't have a big problem in my original foundation. I only have this leak in this new extension of the home, which in some ways saved me a lot of money. It prevented me from having to rip out all the beautiful hardwood floors that I have just one room over. But in this room, we've got some issues that need to be dealt with. Mainly, the trim is now waterlogged, and it's hard to know until the trim is ripped off exactly what is going on behind it. There is potential for mold. There's probably some kind of moisture in there that needs to be cut out and removed, at very least dried. Now, I've handled some of this on my own, mainly because I had to. I don't know if you know this, but everybody flooded. So calling somebody for remediation or to come cut out trim or to just take care of even dehumidifying a space, that's been difficult. They're all backlogged. Many of them are backlogged until now, August. Some of them are even backlogged until the end of August, almost September. So it's taking time to get these people in to do the work needed to get back to ground zero. And frankly speaking, my situation is not an emergency. There are countless people in Chicago right now who are dehomed because they do not have the ability to go in these conditions. They've got mold, they've got water sitting, they've got serious problems. Sewage, when it comes in, dirty water, as you'll often hear as referred to, that's a really, really nasty thing to deal with. Everything it touches has got to be thrown out or ripped out. It's not something like, oh, I got a little bit of sewer water on my couch, I'll just clean it. No. It's probably got to get trashed entirely and replaced. And that's excruciatingly painful, particularly if you own a unit like a garden unit and it flooded the entirety of it. So again, I fully recognize that on the spectrum of flooding, I'm walking away with like a Band-Aid, not a bullet hole. So I feel very lucky that all that flooded for me is a tiled-in floor on an exterior extension of the building that's currently used as a mudroom. In dealing with that, we're going to rip the trim. We're going to check for the mold behind the trim. More than likely, when these remediation companies come in, they have to cut 12 to 18 inches up into the drywall just to check and see how far that water is actually seeped in. If it's gone 12 inches or more, they'll go the 18 just to make sure they get it all. Because the last thing you want to do is reseal something that's moist back in the wall, allow for moisture to reappear and get mold that you didn't take care of the first time. This is only part of the process though. I mean, obviously the literal pain of ripping out trim and cutting the drywall, that's one part. But then you have to let everything dry out. I'm already running dehumidifiers down there. I'm already running fans to make sure that we have airflow. We're trying to get moisture out of the space as best as possible. But the truth is, particularly if you had inches of water in your space, doing it on your own with some kind of, non-commercial grade solution isn't going to cut it. You could go to Home Depot and rent some massive circulating fans to make sure you're getting proper airflow. But more than likely, you're going to want to trust the professionals to help you get everything dry. So that's step 2. Step 1, we're demoing, we're taking out all the wet or moisture impacted spaces. Step 2, we're actually going to have somebody come in and make sure that we have remediated that. We don't have mold growing, we don't have moisture that we haven't taken care of before we move into step 3. And this is where solutions for preventing this from coming in again take place. Now, in some cases, use the example of my step that has the crack underneath it. This is a visible flaw. It's something that can be corrected. A company like Permaseal can actually seal over that concrete slab and prevent water from coming through. They can guarantee that with a lifetime guarantee. If I can't see the source of the water, so take the back room where I know water's penetrating. When it rains, it's pretty clear to see. It's making it into my basement. Thankfully, it's draining, but it is making it in. Now we have to talk about a number of solutions. There's really two that come to mind, or they're most commonly suggested. There are some big companies, US Waterproofing or Permaseal, that do these solutions pretty often and have some great warranties in place, 20 years to lifetime warranties with some solutions. It all depends on the type of foundation you have. So for me, my home being built in the 1800s, it's drywalled in at the moment, but more than likely it's brick or stone or something porous. It's not a rolled concrete, which is probably what they would use today to make the foundation, which would actually make waterproofing harder. With a rolled concrete solution, you can do an epoxy over it. This is what Permaseal is most known for. They seal it. They make it so water doesn't intrude anymore. They cover up any of the cracks. It's a really easy process if you have a rolled cement basement or rolled concrete basement. If you don't, if you're in my situation and you've got something that's more porous, older, probably wouldn't work, right? If you're just putting in some kind of like epoxy solution into a crumble brick or stone pile that was put together to make the foundation, it's going to have so many spaces to get to that it's ineffective. It won't actually work on that space. So the next solution is drain tiles. Drain tiles that are run around the exterior of the property so that as water comes in, whether it's penetrating through a windowsill or an actual foundation crack or anything of that nature, it goes into the drain tile. That drain tile is then run back to the sewer pit. It's usually tied to some sort of sump pump, and it will make sure that it ejects with your sewer correctly. So that if you do get water penetration, it goes in the drain, not on your floors. This is a much more invasive solution, right? I mean, just picture it in theory. If you have cracks in concrete where water's coming in and you can fill those cracks, that's a pretty easy solution. If you have to actually remove any finished structures, like, my basement, they have a bathroom that's in the way, we'd have to tip it out. We'd have to take the whole bathroom out, run drain tiles underneath, put the bathroom back in. This is a much larger, much more involved project. It's a more permanent solution. If I was looking to waterproof this house for the next 10, 15, 20, 50 years, yes, that's probably the correct thing to do. And for me, monitoring this water and seeing if it becomes a continual issue will highly dictate whether or not I'm going to put drains around every inch of the perimeter in the basement. For the time being, the immediate solution is after the trim is cut, after we've remediated any of the moisture there, we're going to look at obviously fixing the crack under the door. We're also going to look at epoxying the rolled concrete that is in my basement addition area, just to make sure that we don't get any penetration of water in the future, specifically in that space. Things I could have done to avoid this, well, I mean, the first is obvious. I probably should have taken care of the crack under the door. It never was a problem, but of course, it never rained 9 inches until it did. So that's one of those things that when they tell you to prepare for things, and maybe more importantly, to set aside funds for things so that when this stuff happens, you can take care of it. I was very thankful that I did have an emergency fund set aside so that I could get contractors in to now come take care of this problem so that the next major rainstorm we're inevitably going to get here in Chicago, it's not a major issue for me. Insurance is another thing you can do to potentially protect against this. I knew going into this, I do not have a homeowner's insurance policy that covers flooding. I knew that. I talked about it with my insurance provider. Could have been an oversight on my part, but I looked at it as in, I don't think that I particularly need it on this address. And moving forward, maybe it'll be something that I consider. We'll have to see. But for now, you also need to understand what that coverage does or does not cover. So for example, my owner's policy, and probably yours, doesn't cover flooding. So if you get groundwater coming in or you get sewer water coming back up, that's not covered in your insurance policy. You are not going to be able to claim and get money for that type of problem. If you have a flood insurance program, you need to make sure what that actually prevents against, because the source of the water, where it flows from, is very important. If it comes from the ground versus the sewer, it might have direct stipulations on how that impacts your insurance. Specifically, if you didn't have some of the prevention methods in place for your sewer from backing up, that maybe you should have. The companies that really do this most, so that you're going to hear the most when you're talking about recovering from a water situation, and more importantly, future-proofing against water, it's going to be US Waterproofing and Permaseal. Both of these companies offer slightly different solutions, but the goal of it is to prevent water from penetrating into your home at any point. And they have different approaches to make that happen. Specific to your sewer, there are some things they can do depending on what the cause of the flooding is to help alleviate some of the problems. Specific to the sewer, there are methods that they can use to help with this. One thing is a valve they can install, an actual pressure relief valve, so that if the sewer starts to backlog and overflow towards your home, this valve would shut and prevent that from happening. Now, these need to be installed legally. I've heard nightmare stories of neighbors illegally installing these valves, which then pressure washes the sewer back into the other neighbor's home. It's a nightmare story on its own. But as long as you're doing it up to code and as long as you're pulling the right permits, there are correct ways to install valve systems or some additional sump systems to help prevent water overflow, particularly if you're in an area where you just have a lot of municipal overflow or groundwater issues. All in all, what I've learned from this is preparation is key. Knowing your insurance, knowing your weak points potentially for water intrusion in this case, knowing your contractors that you're going to call when you need things done like drywall, trim, mold remediation, potential sealing. Having these resources in place has been critically helpful for me, particularly when I needed to call them in a pinch or to get them in quickly. And particularly when now it's so difficult to schedule, having multiple resources on hand has been a lifesaver. If you feel like you aren't prepared for those decisions or you don't have those resources, let me know. I have plenty of local Chicago resources I can get you in touch with. And if you're looking in your neighborhood, maybe you don't live in Chicago and you're watching this video, real estate agents deal with this stuff all the time, mostly by necessity, not necessarily because we like dealing with water issues, but it comes up in listings, it comes up in buyer situations, and it comes up in our own home. So if you need contractor recommendations, a great place to start is with your agent. And I'm always happy to help with those referrals here in Chicago. Let's all try to have a dry end of the summer. I know I will. I'm going to go get those cracks fixed. I'm going to get that water taken care of. And my goal is to keep this basement dry moving forward. Wishing you all the best of luck. If you did get water, truly and sincerely, let me know if I can help you in any way and if I can connect you with a professional to help you take care of that. Best of luck. I'll talk to you soon.